about now.
Thank you.
Now, I wanted to ask you about a time where, do you know Detective Hogan with APD Homicide?
I do.
And was there ever a time that you provided any assistance to him in identifying someone in a case he was working?
I did.
Can you describe for the jury how that came about?
During the investigation of the homicide of Shymel Drinks, I was asked to review some photographs of potential suspects in that case.
And were you able to assist in identifying any of those suspects for Detective Hogan?
I was.
Can you describe for the jury how or what you did and how you were able to assist him on that?
We had located some social media photographs of a potential suspect. The suspect looked familiar to me, but I couldn't recall a name for the suspect. I reached out to another law enforcement contact who was able to send back a photograph of Mr. Quamarvious Nichols, who I immediately recognized was, in fact, the person from the social media pictures.
And did you share that with Detective Hogan for his case?
I did.
Now, turning your attention to March 17th of 2022, were you working that day at APD?
I was.
And you were still in the gang unit?
Yes, sir.
And so can you describe for the jury, did you ever become involved with some arrest warrants that day?
I did.
Can you describe for the jury how you got involved with that?
I was advised that two suspects in the Shymel Drinks homicide were arrested at 2481 Meadow Lark Lane in the city of East Point. And I then responded to that scene after those arrests had been made.
And when you responded, do you recall roughly around what time?
I don't without reviewing the report.
Would looking at a copy of your report help refresh your recollection?
Yes, sir.
I'm approaching you with a copy of your report. If your memory is refreshed, just look up at me before answering. Is your memory now refreshed of what time you responded?
Yes, sir.
What time was that?
It was approximately 3 p.m.
Now, when you got there, can you describe for the jury, what did you see? What did you do?
Mr. Jackson and Mr. Nichols had already been placed in custody. The scene had been secured and some evidence had been recovered during that arrest, which was then transferred to my custody to be transported to property.
Do you recall any other law enforcement agencies that you interacted with outside of APD?
There were a number of law enforcement agencies there, including the East Point Police Department, Georgia State Patrol, and additional agencies as well.
And when you arrived on scene, were the suspects already in custody or something else?
The suspects were already in custody and I believe were being transported or has been transported by the time I arrived.
And did you, when you arrived, without saying what they told you, speak with some of these officers that were on scene before you arrived?
I did.
Did you speak with an Officer Baker?
I did.
Did you speak with, or let me ask you this, when you got there, was that address an apartment, a business, a home?
As a residence, I have single family residence.
Did you notice or see any vehicles at that residence?
I did.
What did you see?
There was a white Audi A5 with a Maryland tag.
Now, when you were on scene, you mentioned you gathered some items from some of the law enforcement on scene.
I did.
Can you describe for the jury what you gathered?
Yes, and may I refer to my report?
You may. Just look up at me when your memory is refreshed.
Okay.
What were some of the items that you gathered?
One of the items was a firearm, an FN Herstal 5.7 handgun. Another item was a pink beanie cap, also a black backpack that was recovered as well.
Now, I wanted to ask you about that FN Herschel. Is that a 5.7 by 2.8 firearm?
Yes, sir.
I am approaching you with what has been marked as State's Exhibit actually. maybe up here before you, which is up here as 221 Victor Victor. I'm going to ask you, Detective Belknap, can you look at what's on the stand before you and see if you recognize either any of the APD evidence labels and or if there is a serial number on that firearm?
Yes, sir.
What is the serial number?
The serial number is 386409184.
And I'm guessing you don't have serial numbers memorized. Is that fair to say?
It's fair.
Would looking at your report to refresh on the serial number of the gun you collected assist?
Yes, sir.
You may use your report to refresh. Is your memory refreshed?
It is.
And is that the firearm that you recovered at 2481 Meadowlark Drive?
It is.
Now, when you recovered it, was it loaded?
It was loaded when it was recovered. At the time when it was transferred to me, I don't recall whether it had been rendered safe and unloaded. And my report, I don't believe, was clear as to the condition it was in when I took custody of it.
And is that typical when you recover firearms to transport them to render them safe before moving them from a scene?
Yes, it is.
Now, you had also mentioned a pink beanie that you recovered.
Yes, sir.
I will gather that in just a second, but before we get to that, was there a black book bag that you had recovered on that scene?
Yes, sir.
Now, do you recall ever looking inside of that book bag?
Yes, sir.
And do you recall who it was that gave you that book bag?
I need to refresh my memory with my report.
You may. Do you recall who gave you that book bag that was on scene?
I don't, and I believe it was Officer Baker or Officer Gachette who had responded to the scene, but I didn't note specifically in my report who gave me the backpack.
And when you got that backpack, did you initially go through it?
Yes, sir.
And what was inside of that book bag?
There was a variety of narcotics within the backpack.
Was there any commercially packaged items?
There were.
What were they?
There was commercially packaged marijuana within the backpack.
And do you recall how many commercially packaged marijuana there was in that book bag?
There were a total of 19 bags.
Was there any pills in that book bag?
There were.
Now, do you have any familiarity or training with encountering pills that you may find on the street in working with APD?
I do.
And when you encounter pills, do you personally do any steps to try to initially see what they possibly may be?
Sure. So I mean, the first thing is just observing what they are. And oftentimes we've run across narcotics in similar form before and may recognize them immediately as what they are. Additionally, we have resources, including open source resources like the internet, several websites that can help us identify drugs, including prescription drugs, so that we can have sort of a place to start for testing those items.
And when you collect items such as you did there, do you typically indicate, even if you don't know exactly what something is, what it's suspected to be?
I do.
Now, with reviewing those items, I'm going to ask you, what did you find in that book bag that you suspected to be? In terms of what type of pills did you believe was in that book bag based on your training experience?
So I believe there were 3 types of pills that we saw. The first was a bag containing what I believed and identified as being MDMA. Another bag that contained what I recognized to be oxycodone, and an additional bag that contained what I recognized and believed to be Adderall.
Now, at this time when you're initially on scene, you have that firearm that we just discussed and this book bag with the narcotics. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And did you ever transport those items to anywhere else from the scene?
I did.
Did you collect and package those items?
I did.
And did you have any familiarity with where that white Audi was taken from the scene?
I do.
Can you describe for the jury what you know about that?
Yes, the white Audi was transported from the arrest location to the Atlanta Police Department Annex building. And there are vehicle cages there that we can store vehicles for pending search warrants or further processing.
And is that normal with recovered vehicles such as that to transport them to the annex?
It can be. It just depends on the case, whether further processing is needed or not.
Now, Detective Belknap, I am approaching you with what's been marked as 354 through 358 Victor. If you could take a minute and look at those bags and the identifying markers on them. Now, do you have is your name on any of those evidence labels?
Yes, it is.
And do you see any APD case number with those bags?
I do.
And do you typically put the APD case number from the scene that when you collect items before you introduce it into property?
That's correct.
And is that the same APD case number on the report that you have used to refresh your memory from that March 17, 2022?
Yes, sir.
With looking at those items, are you able to tell the jury what those are?
I can.
Please do.
So this first bag contains the pills that were suspected Adderall. The second bag contains...
And Detective Belknap, before you do, are they a fair and accurate depiction of the drugs that you collected from the scene that day?
They are.
Your Honor, at this time, the state moves to tender into evidence 354 through 358 Victor.
May I?
Yes.
With the state?
Sure.
No objection.
All right, those are admitted.
Detective Belknap, now that they're in evidence, you may, and please do, can you tell the jury what you have before you?
Okay. So this first bag, again, are the pills that I suspected were Adderall. The second contains the suspected oxycodone. The third bag contains some of the commercially packaged marijuana. The fourth bag contains additional commercially packaged marijuana. And this final bag contains the suspected MDMA.
Now, after you packaged those items, you went back to APD property, is that correct?
I actually would have packaged these at APD property.
And at APD property, did you ever get notified from someone on the Meadowlark scene after you went back to property from that first time?
I did.
Can you describe for the jury how that came about?
I was called by a supervisor and advised that East Point police were back on scene near the arrest location where a citizen had reported finding a firearm laying by the roadway.
Now, after being notified about that additional firearm, what did you do?
I responded back to the scene to recover that firearm as well.
So when you got on scene, do you recall who you spoke with?
I do.
Who did you speak with?
I spoke with Investigator Klickner from the East Point Police Department.
And when you met Investigator Klickner, can you tell the jury like where you were? Were you inside, outside? Where did you all meet up?
We met on the roadway where this firearm had been seen and reported.
And where was the firearm when you saw it?
The firearm was just off the roadway in the grass, like I guess within a couple feet of the roadway.
And was there a magazine nearby?
There was.
Now, what did you do once you got there and saw that firearm that Investigator Klickner had?
I ultimately rendered the firearm safe and transported it to Atlanta Police Department property as well.
I want to ask you, does your report reflect the serial number on the firearm that you collected when meeting Investigator Klickner?
May I refresh my memory?
You may.
It does.
And I'm going to approach you with 220 Victor Victor. Is that, or is the 220 Victor Victor have the serial number on that item?
Is there a serial number on this?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
And does that serial number match the firearm that you collected?
I can confirm, I believe there is a slight variation between what was in the report and what is on the actual weapon, as later investigation revealed.
Can you describe that later investigation regarding the serial number?
I can. So after this weapon was recovered, taken to Atlanta Police Department property, later on I followed up on the E-trace, the further investigation of the firearm, and was advised that the weapon had not been traced back to an original purchaser. I reviewed both my report and the photographs of the weapon and realized that due to some damage to the serial number on the weapon, which had been heavily scratched, that I had mistakenly identified one of the digits or one of the characters on this serial number from the weapon. I was able to go back, make that correction, and then complete the E-trace report and locate the actual origination of the firearm.
With that further investigation, looking at that firearm now, is that the firearm that you collected from Investigator Klickner on March 17, 2022?
Yes, sir.
Your Honor, at this time, the state moves to tender into evidence 220 Victor Victor at this time.
No objection.
All right, that's admitted.
And Investigator Belknap, was that firearm, when you had mentioned the E-trace, was that firearm, did you check it to see if it was ever reported stolen?
I did.
And what did you find?
I contacted the original purchaser of the weapon, who advised that he had sold the weapon in a third-party sale to another party, but did have contact information for the purchaser. I then contacted that person, who advised that the weapon had been stolen from him, and an Atlanta Police Department report had been made at the time of the theft.
And did you transport that firearm back to APD property as well?
I did. At the time of recovery, I did.
Now, after you come back to APD property, did you ever take out any additional arrest warrants?
I did.
What were the arrest warrants that you took out?
I took out additional arrest warrants, if I may refresh my memory.
May.
Additional arrest warrants for Mr. Jackson for possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, possession of a Schedule II controlled substance with intent to distribute, and 3 counts of
Yes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we get started back with the testimony, I just wanted to let y'all know to disregard the witness's comment about a warrant being taken for Mr. Stillwell for drugs. Go ahead, Mr. Edmonds.
Thank you, Your Honor. Now, Detective Belknap, you never took out any warrants for any of the drugs related to that book bag as it pertains to Shannon Stillwell, did you?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you take out gang warrants?
I did.
And did you take out firearm and gang warrants as well on Mr. Nichols?
I did.
No further questions. Thank you, Detective Belknap.
Yes, sir.
Please court, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective Belknap.
Morning, sir.
We've met Max Shard. I represent Mr. Stillwell. So, I first want to ask you about the search of Jeffrey Williams' address at 355 Allison Drive on May 9th, 2022. You were present for that search, correct?
I was.
You were one of the officers executing the search.
Yes, sir.
Okay, and you didn't write a report about the execution of that search warrant, did you?
I did not.
Okay, Investigator Storno wrote a report, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and I have asked you to review photos taken during the execution of that search warrant And I've also asked you to review Investigator Storno's notes, or report, correct?
That's correct.
And you were kind enough to do that for me, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. And Mr. Atkins, if I could have your help displaying any images as Detective Belknap speaks about things, I'd appreciate it. On May 9th, 2022, do you recall who was present at 355 Allison Drive when you executed the search warrant?
Could you be more specific?
Okay. Jeffrey Williams was present, correct?
Yes, sir.
Martinez Arnold was present.
Yes, sir.
Diamante Kendrick was present.
Yes, sir.
Jeffrey Williams' teenage son was present, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. My client, Shannon Stillwell, was not present at 355 Allison Drive on May 9th, 2022, was he?
He was not.
Okay. And you don't have any evidence at all that Mr. Stillwell has ever even been to that residence, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. And during that search warrant was sought out by Investigator Viverito, is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay. And during that search warrant, executing that search warrant on May 9th, 2022, you all collected drugs, correct? Suspected drugs?
We did.
Delta 8 syrup as well.
Yes.
Okay. Jewelry,
Yes.
money,
Yes.
phones.
Yes.
Mr. Williams' cars were seized.
That's correct.
And I'm not going to ask any questions about any of those things, but you also collected guns, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. In fact, there were 6 guns collected, correct?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And you have reviewed pictures taken during the execution of that search warrant, correct?
I did.
Okay. I would like to just talk about each gun individually. I can go in whatever order you have. If you could just tell us, do you have photos in front of you that display the different types of guns and the different guns that were collected on May 9th, 2022?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Could you just tell us the exhibit number of the first gun so Mr. Atkins can display it for the jury?
The first one I'm looking at is 57XX.
Okay, and that gun, from the pictures, can you tell us what type of gun, the manufacturer, anything that you can tell about that gun?
It appears to be a Glock semi-automatic handgun.
Glock semi-automatic handgun, okay. And do you have any other pictures in that sequence that reveal a serial number for that gun?
I believe so. The next one is 58XX.
Mr. Atkins, if you could display 58XX. Okay, and is the serial number BKMN536?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. What is the second gun that was collected?
The next one is 30XX.
You did say 30XX, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there a close-up of that gun that would help describe what type of gun it is?
I believe it's 31XX.
Okay, 31XX. And what kind of gun is that?
It's another Glock semi-automatic handgun.
Okay. Can you tell what type, projectiles or what caliber projectiles that gun fires?
It's a little difficult to tell from this picture, but from the picture alone.
Okay. Now, neither of these first two guns were the switch, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Could you tell us what about the next gun? What number we should display?
Oh, sir, I apologize. There's actually another photo, I believe, of that gun we were just looking at, 32XX.
All right. Mr. Atkins, if you could display 32XX. All right, thank you. And for that second gun, that's the serial number,
I believe it is, yes.
and it's BNU 633.
Yes, sir.
All right. How about the third gun?
The third is 21XX.
And what can you tell us about this gun as far as the caliber or the manufacturer or anything?
It's another semi-automatic handgun, and it appears to be a Smith & Wesson, although I can't read it on the photograph.
Okay. And is that a switch?
No, sir.
Okay. And is that the serial number? 22XX?
22XX. Yes, sir.
All right. Great. Thank you. How about the fourth gun?
The fourth is 19XX.
Okay. And what can you tell us about this gun?
And this appears to be a tan Glock semi-automatic handgun.
Okay. Is that a switch?
Does not appear to be.
The fifth gun?
That would be 15XX.
Okay. What can you tell us about this gun? Is there another picture associated with that gun?
14XX and 15XX.
14XX. Let's go with that. What can you tell us about this gun?
It's another semi-automatic handgun. Also appears to be a Smith & Wesson.
Okay. And how about the sixth gun?
This is 51, 52, and 53XX.
Now that gun, what can you tell us about that gun?
This is another Glock semi-automatic handgun, and it does appear to have a conversion switch attached to the weapon.
Okay, that is the switch.
Yes, sir.
All right, excellent. And those are the 6 guns that were collected from Jeffrey Williams' residence on May 9, 2022.
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Atkins. Okay, I just want to clear something up. And I'm speaking about, I'm not going to go through individually. I'm talking about all 6 firearms. Okay. Do you have any evidence that Mr. Stillwell has ever touched any of these firearms?
I do not.
Okay. Do you have any evidence that ballistically, any of these firearms were ever used in the Shymel Drinks homicide?
I didn't conduct that follow-up investigation, so I don't know whether it was or wasn't, but I'm not aware of any evidence that it was, or any of them were.
And that includes the switch too, correct?
It does.
Okay. And do you have any evidence, ballistically or otherwise, that any of these guns were used in the January 10, 2015 shooting of Donovan Thomas?
I do not.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, I appreciate that, Detective Belknap. I'm going to move to your work on March 17th. When you arrived on Meadowlark Drive, you saw the white Audi, correct?
Yes, sir.
It was still in the parking lot.
It was in the driveway, yes.
Excuse me, yes, I'm sorry, the driveway. Still had the Maryland tags affixed to it?
It did.
Still had the tint?
I don't recall noting the tint.
Okay,
I don't believe the car had been altered.
okay. You don't believe the car had been altered? What do you mean by that?
I don't believe the car had been moved or processed at that time when I arrived on the scene.
Oh, okay, okay. You mentioned finding a beanie,
Yes, sir.
and that is in evidence and was just admitted through you.
Correct.
Okay, so that beanie would be a separate beanie from any beanie that was collected on March 17th at 2830 Waters Road.
I don't know the answer to that question. I mean, it was collected on Meadowlark Lane.
It was collected on
Meadowlark
Meadowlark
Drive.
Lane.
Yes.
Okay, so if there's a separate beanie, if there's a beanie that was collected and put into evidence from Waters Road, there's two separate beanies, correct?
It would appear so, yes.
And the beanie that you collected on Meadowlark Drive was, well, do you know who was wearing that prior to their arrest?
Yes, sir.
And was it my client, Shannon Stillwell?
It was.
And you collected that beanie because you had viewed the BP video that Detective Hogan had showed you already, correct?
I had.
And you had noted that Mr. Stillwell was wearing a pink beanie in that BP video.
I had observed that, yes.
And that's clear video as far as videos go. It wasn't grainy, it was clear. And you saw Mr. Stillwell wearing the pink beanie.
Yes.
And that's why you collected this pink beanie, because he was, in your mind as a detective, it was important to collect that pink beanie because it matched what's in the BP video.
Well, I agree with that. Just to be clear, it was collected prior to my arrival and was given to me to transport to property.
Okay, and you made sure you put it into property?
I did.
Okay. All right. The bag of drugs, did you recover that backpack?
I did not.
Okay, have you seen the video from the Phoenix helicopter?
I have.
Okay, and you would agree that it was Mr. Nichols that threw that book bag into those bushes, correct?
I would. Yes, sir.
All right. And prior to, from that video, you can see Mr. Nichols exiting the white Audi with that book bag.
That's correct.
Okay. In your experience as an officer, you have seen people flee from the police because they have drugs in the car, correct?
I have.
Okay. The FN Hurstel 5.7, serial number 386409184, that I believe is in evidence 221 VV. That was collected by Trooper Campbell and given to you for evidence, correct?
That's correct.
All right, and you would agree that that gun is not a switch. It's not modified, not a switch.
No, it is not.
Okay. And then later, you were called by an Officer Klickner to collect an FNX 45, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And just to be clear, the FN, going back, the FN 57 shoots 5.7 rounds, correct?
That's correct.
All right. And the FNX 45 tactical shoots 45 caliber rounds.
Yes, it does.
And those are the two guns that were located at Meadowlark Drive on March 17, 2022, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And you collected those firearms and brought them into property, into evidence to preserve for further investigation, correct?
I did.
Okay. Those two guns, either the 5.7 and the 45, do you have any ballistic evidence linking those guns to the January 10, 2015 shooting of Donovan Thomas?
I didn't conduct any ballistics investigations on the firearms, so I don't have any ballistics evidence related to these.
Do you have any evidence that connects them to the January 10th shooting of Donovan Thomas as we sit here today?
I do not.
Okay. And how about, and let me ask you, okay, and how about this? Those two guns, the 5.7 and the 45, do you have any ballistic evidence that connects those guns to the March 14, 2017 shooting of Shymel Drinks?
I don't have ballistic evidence of any kind related to these weapons.
In fact, neither the 5.7 or the 45 even shoots 40 caliber. They're not capable of shooting 40 caliber rounds, are they?
Neither is chambered to shoot a 40 caliber round.
Okay. You, just a couple more questions. You indicated that Detective Hogan had you look at the video for the FedEx to identify Mr. Stillwell and also Mr. Nichols, correct?
I reviewed the video at some point. I believe that what I initially saw were some of the social media photos of Mr. Nichols. I don't remember what I saw initially.
Did you review the BP video at some point?
At some point, yes.
Okay. This is what I want to know. Did you ever review with Detective Hogan or by yourself the FedEx video from March 14, 2017? Excuse me, March 14, 2022.
I don't recall if I ever reviewed that video or not.
Okay, so you're not even certain if you've ever seen that video?
I don't know. I'm not certain if I have or not.
Okay. All right, thank you. No further questions.
Redirect. Oh, okay. Come on
I
in.
know I'm surprising the court, but.
Sorry.
Good morning.
Good morning.
We have met. It's good to see you again.
Yes, sir, you too.
So I have some questions about what you said today. You mentioned that to Mr. Shart that Mr. Kendrick was present in the house at Allison Drive on May 9th, 2022, correct?
I don't recall exactly what his question was, but yes,
Okay. Did you actually see Mr. Kendrick in the house?
I did not.
Okay. The 6 guns that were found in that house, in Mr. Williams' house, do you have any evidence that Mr. Kendrick was ever in possession of those 6 guns?
I do not.
Do you have any evidence that he was anywhere near those 6 guns?
I do not.
Did you take part in the inventory, possession, or transport of the jewelry that was found in Mr. Williams' home?
My role during the search was to take photographs of evidence as it was recovered.
Do you recall there being 2 Richard Mille watches in Mr. Williams' home?
I don't know if I would know those if I saw them, so I don't know if there were 2 or not.
Okay. Do you recall seeing it's a Richard Mille brand. I understand you don't know what that brand would look like, but do you recall seeing a white ceramic watch with a pink band in the jewelry that you collected, or that was collected in that home?
I believe one was. Do I remember seeing it? I certainly don't a couple years later.
Okay. If a Richard Mille RM055 Bubba Watson white ceramic watch is not present in property today. Do you know what happened to that watch?
I wouldn't have any idea.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
All right, redirect.
Detective Belknap, on cross, you were asked by defense counsel about the May 9th search of Jeffrey Williams' home. Do you recall that?
Yes, sir.
Now, you actually were the photographer of those crime scene photographs we walked through, weren't you?
Yes, sir.
Now, you remember being asked questions about, I believe it was the 6 firearms that you found in that house,
Yes, sir.
and if they have any ballistic evidence to the March 14th, 2022 murder of Shymel Drinks. Do you
Correct.
recall that?
Yes.
Now, how many months later was this search from March 14th, 2022?
That'd be 2 months later.
Was Demekion Garlington arrested on May 9th, 2022 at Jeffrey Williams' home?
He was not.
Was Shannon Stillwell arrested on May 9th, 2022 in Jeffrey Williams' home?
No, he was not.
What about Miles Farley?
He was not.
What about Quamarvious Nichols?
He was not.
Now, I want to also ask you as the photographer, I'm going to publish what's marked as 64 X-ray. It's going to come up on the big screen and on your computer. Is this one of the photographs that you took?
It appears to be.
I'm going to go to 65 X-ray. Is this one of the photographs that you took?
It is.
Why did you take this photograph?
In documenting this scene, we saw this pamphlet for Mr. McMiller's funeral. Mr. McMiller was associated with YSL, with Mr. Williams, and had been shot and killed.
What was the date that he was murdered?
It was March 11th of 2022.
And do you recall if that murder was at a house or on a highway?
It was on the highway.
Is it, I don't have a pointer, but on this whiteboard, is that March 11th, 2022 and I-75, 85?
Yeah, I believe so, yes.
And was Shymel Drinks murdered how many days after March 11th?
I believe it was 3 days later.
Now, I also want to ask you about, thank you, Mr. Vadi. You were asked on cross by defense counsel about a watch. Do you remember that?
I do.
Now, I'm just going to come out and ask you because we've been dancing around it. Did you steal any watch or know of any APD personnel who stole any item from that house?
Absolutely not.
Can you tell the jury the protocols that are in place when you document, was everyone wearing body cam?
They were.
And can you describe for the jury the process y'all have when you go through that large amount of evidence on a scene like that? In terms of, do you video when you're putting it into property?
Yes, usually our body cameras will be running during the search of the home, during the transport, and at property when submitting property.
And were you all on scene or working that case for a short time or a long time?
We were out there for several hours.
One brief moment, Your Honor. No further questions. Thank you, Detective Belknap.
Thank you.
All right, any recross?
Briefly,
You were asked on redirect if you're aware of any member of the APD that would have stolen this particular watch I asked you about, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have full and total knowledge of all the activities of members of APD?
I don't.
If this particular watch, this Richard Mille watch, ceramic watch, is present in a photograph from Jeffrey Williams' home and it is no longer present in property right now, could anything have happened to that watch other than it have been stolen or lost?
Well, no, not every item that we photograph is ultimately taken as evidence. And I think there are probably a broad number of possibilities of what could have happened to that watch other than it being stolen or lost.
Is it the practice of your office to leave behind a $500,000 watch when you're seizing jewelry?
I don't know that I can answer that as far as practices go. I have no idea the value of this watch that we're discussing, so I'm woefully uneducated as far as that goes. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, as diligent as we are, sometimes even evidence is left behind at scenes. In this case, I don't have any specific information about this particular watch.
Can you explain to the jury the procedure when you go about seizing a vehicle, such as was seized at Jeffrey Williams' home?
As far as the procedure, we would call a tow truck to come and tow that vehicle to another location.
Is there any searching of the vehicle and inventorying of property within that vehicle at the time of the seizure?
It can depend on the scene and if there's a search warrant for the vehicle or if the vehicle is accessible. Sometimes the keys may not be present, can't access a vehicle, and sometimes it's towed to a secure location to conduct an inventory or further processing of that vehicle.
If the vehicle is accessible at the scene and you have a warrant that allows you to enter that vehicle, what's the procedure for what you do with the contents of the vehicle?
Typically, those contents would be cataloged, valuable items may be secured, evidence may be seized.
Is the procedure to leave valuable items within the vehicle?
Not typically, and again, that could be case dependent if the vehicle is going to be removed to another secure location for further processing.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you for your time.